Most people overthink lighting because they assume it's expensive, technical, and only works in designer homes. But in this video, I'm going to prove to you that the opposite is true, because you can make any home look twice as good just by using lighting, and that's without a big budget, custom fixtures, or ripping out your ceilings. And if you follow the 5-step framework I'm about to share with you, I promise you your home will look and feel so much better just by making a few simple lighting changes that are both cheap and easy to implement. And the best way to explain this is, I want you to imagine that lighting your home is like setting the mood at a dinner party. Your job isn't just to make sure everyone can see their food. Your job is to make people feel comfortable, relaxed, and like they want to stay longer. Now, at most dinner parties, there are two extremes. On one hand, you've got the person who turns on every overhead light in the room. So ceiling lights blazing, everything evenly lit, and there are no shadows anywhere. And so technically, you can see everything, but it feels cold, flat, and uncomfortable. It's like eating dinner in an office or a hospital. And then on the other end, you've got the person who thinks moody means no light at all. You know, they've got a single dim lamp in the corner, half the room in darkness, and people squinting to find their glass. So this might look cool in a photo, but in real life, it's impractical and kind of annoying because people feel lost, not relaxed. But good lighting lives in the middle. And most people miss this because they think lighting is about brightness when it's actually about balance. You know, it's about where the light comes from, how it hits every surface in the room, and what job each light is performing. So instead of giving you random lighting tips or telling you to buy some expensive products, I want to give you a framework, a way to look at any room, diagnose what's wrong, and know exactly what to fix. And this is the same method of thinking professional interior designers apply every single day, whether they're working on a studio apartment or a luxury hotel. The framework is called SCALE, and each letter solves one of the core lighting mistakes people make. And when you apply the SCALE framework correctly, lighting stops feeling complicated and starts feeling obvious. So you can stop chasing trendy lighting fixtures and start fixing the real issues that are making your home feel off. So let's start at the beginning, because if you get this wrong, nothing else matters. The S in SCALE stands for source, and this is where most lighting goes wrong. Because most homes don't actually have a lighting problem, they have a single source problem. And when a room feels flat, cold, or cheap, it's usually because all the light is coming from one place. And that's almost always the ceiling, and it's usually one fixture that's trying to do everything. But from a design perspective, light isn't meant to come from a single point. It's meant to come from multiple places, and each of those places has a specific job. And when a single light is responsible for the entire room, it's forced to be too bright and too harsh, and even a beautiful fixture can't save that. So if it helps, you can think about lighting the same way you might think about furniture layout, which is that you wouldn't push all your furniture against a single wall and hope it works, but that's exactly what you're doing when all your light is concentrated from a single source overhead. And that's why good lighting starts with distributed sources. You still want light from above, but you also want light at eye level and lower down in the room. Because when light comes from different heights, each source can do less, and the room feels softer and more intentional. And this is why spaces with lamps and subtle accent lighting immediately feel more comfortable, even when the furniture itself is really simple. And so a useful way to think about this is like this. The ceiling light creates visibility, but atmosphere comes from the secondary and tertiary sources like table lamps, floor lamps, and wall lamps, and those lights don't need to be bright. Their job is to create presence. And so a good litmus test is if a room only works when one switch is on, that's a problem. Because a well-lit room should still feel good with the ceiling light off when it's using different combinations of smaller sources. Because when you bring light down into the room, closer to where people actually are, the space immediately feels more private and more human. Now, the C in SCALE stands for contrast, because once you have multiple light sources, the next mistake people make is turning everything on at full brightness. But good lighting isn't about making a room equally bright, it's about deciding what should stand out and what can fall back. And that difference is what creates depth and a sense of calm. So if you've got even lighting in your home, it feels safe, but it's also why rooms feel flat at night. And so it's no coincidence that spaces like offices and supermarkets use even lighting, because it provides visibility, but not comfort. But homes, on the other hand, need variation, with some areas intentionally brighter and others intentionally more dim. And so with that in mind, designers use contrast to guide how a room is used, because brighter zones support activity, while softer zones support rest. But when a living room is lit evenly, every area feels like a task zone, which is why it often feels uncomfortable after dark. But contrast also affects how large a room feels, because light pulls surfaces forward and darkness pushes them back. And so letting corners or secondary walls stay quieter makes a space feel deeper and more layered instead of just flat. Now, the A in scale stands for angle, and most people judge lighting by brightness, but designers judge it by direction. Because you can have all the right bulbs and the right fixtures, but a room can still feel dead if the light is hitting everything from the wrong angle. For example, front-facing light flattens the room. It removes shadow, kills texture, and makes good materials look cheaper than they actually are. And this is why spaces lit mostly by ceiling fixtures feel so lifeless at night, even if they look fine during the day. But good lighting behaves more like daylight. It comes in from the side, moves across surfaces, and creates subtle senses of variation. And angled light also reveals texture on surfaces like wood grain, plaster, fabric, and stone, while straight-on light turns those same surfaces into flat planes. And this is why techniques like wall washing and grazing work so well. Because when light moves across a wall instead of straight at it, the surface starts to feel intentional instead of unfinished. And the same idea applies to lamps, because light that moves horizontally through a room feels softer and more human than light that's coming straight down from above. So here's a simple thing you can check. If you can see the bulb and feel the light hitting your eyes, the angle is probably wrong, because good lighting rarely points at people. Instead, it points at walls, floors, shelves, and objects, and lets the light reflected off of those surfaces do the heavy lifting. Now, the L in scale stands for level, because one of the fastest ways to spot amateur lighting is to look up. Because if almost all the light in a room lives on the ceiling, the space is going to feel stiff no matter how nice the furniture is. And that's why designers think about lighting in relation to the body, not the room. Because people experience rooms while they're seated or standing, not while they're floating near the ceiling. But when light is concentrated too high, the room might be bright, but it doesn't feel welcoming. And this is why overhead-only lighting works in offices, schools, and hospitals, but feels wrong in living rooms and bedrooms. Because high light like that feels exposing, while bringing light down into the room immediately makes it feel calmer and more personal. So if you want your space to feel more comfortable, you need to invest in eye-level lighting. So that's table lamps, floor lamps, and wall lamps that are going to soften shadows, make faces look better, and help the room feel more inviting. So a simple test here is to turn off the ceiling light, and if the room stops working, then your lighting level is wrong. Because a good setup still feels complete using light at different heights, especially around where people actually sit. And then the E in scale stands for emotion. And surprisingly, this is the part that most people skip, even though it's the part that actually matters, because you can get the sources right, add some contrast, fix your angles, and dial in the levels, and a room can still feel wrong if the lighting has no emotion in it. And that's why designers don't think about lighting rooms, they think about lighting experiences. Because every space has a job. Your living room should make you want to sit longer, your bedroom should help your body slow down, and your dining room should make people look good and want to linger there for a longer period of time. But if the lighting in a room doesn't support how the space is meant to be used, then it's actively working against you. And this is why copying lighting from Pinterest, hotels, or restaurants often fails, because those places are designed for short-term impact or to create a specific mood. But your home has to work night after night without exhausting you, which means the lighting needs to feel calm, flexible, and supportive. And our emotions also change based on the time of day. And so a room that feels fine in the afternoon can feel harsh at night if the lighting doesn't adapt. Warm light encourages rest, while cooler light signals focus and activity. And that's why at night, lighting should generally get softer and warmer, not brighter. And so the final test here is simple. Do you and the people around you want to linger in your space? If your guests naturally sit down, lower their voices, and relax, then your lighting is working. But if they stay alert or restless, then something's off. Because good lighting doesn't call attention to itself. Instead, it quietly makes you feel better without you knowing why. But now that you understand the thinking behind the scale framework, I want to make it super easy for you to apply. And that's why I took the theory behind scale, as well as a bunch of other interior design knowledge, and built it right into a custom tool. Now, all you need to do is snap a photo of your room, and the tool will show you exactly what to do with it to make it look amazing by applying scale principles. So let me show you a few examples of this so you can see the framework and the tool in action, because all the images you're about to see were generated by the tool itself. So in this first example, the bathroom here relies almost entirely on the vanity light above the mirror, which leaves the space single source and poorly layered. Everything is lit to a similar brightness, which flattens the green wall and doesn't give any visual hierarchy or focal point to the room. The front-facing vanity light washes the wall and the mirror evenly, which flattens out any textures and risks creating a glare instead of the soft light you'd prefer to have on your face. All the meaningful light sits above eye level, which makes the room feel impersonal and more like a utility space than a private one. And despite the calming materials they've included in here, the lighting feels rushed and overly functional, which encourages you to use the room quickly instead of with comfort or ease. Now, I uploaded this photo to the lighting tool, and this is what it gave me in return. As you can see, the light now comes from multiple different sources. These vertical wall lamps next to the mirror, this subtle under cabinet glow, and a small accent on the shelf above the toilet instead of the single overhead blast. The vanity area is brighter while the floor and the edges fall slightly darker, which creates some depth and a clear visual hierarchy instead of just a flat brightness. The side lighting flanking the mirror lights the face evenly and grazes this green wall, which reveals some texture without any glare or harsh shadows, and most of the light now sits at eye level or below, which brings the room down to human scale rather than lighting it from the ceiling down. And overall, the space feels calm and private, more like a quiet evening retreat than a bathroom you need to rush through. Now, you might be thinking, I can just ask ChatGPT or some other image generation model to create these kinds of images. And you're right, you can. I did exactly that, and I got this. Now, this is certainly better than the original photo we started with, but it's still not a great lighting setup, and there are a couple of reasons why. For example, one of the big issues here is that all the lights are in one corner of the room, so they have to be turned up extra bright to keep the rest of the room lit. But what you'd actually want, if this were your bathroom, would be to have at least one additional source of light on this half of the room with the toilet, so that you can turn down the brightness on the other side and not go blind every time you look in the mirror. But another problem is that the lights are all at a pretty similar height. Yes, having the table lamp next to the sink does help to provide some variation in level, but putting it right next to the two wall sconces basically just negates that. And so if you were to use this exact lighting setup in your own bathroom, you'd make all these changes and you'd still be disappointed with the result. So that's why when you're visualizing a space like this, you need to have some real theory behind what you're doing, because just asking for better lighting isn't enough. And that's why I've built a tool specifically around the scale framework so it knows exactly what kind of lighting will look good in your space. But I've also included a lot more than just the scale framework inside the tool to ensure that the images you get back are the absolute best they can be. So if you want to try it out for yourself and start visualizing your own home with a new and improved lighting setup, there's a link in the description. But now let's move on to the next example, because I want to show you how to apply this scale framework across a few different rooms so you get a deeper understanding of how it works. So here, all the light is coming from a single ceiling fixture, which means that one source is doing all the work and the room feels lit for function instead of lit for atmosphere. Everything is lit at roughly the same brightness, so nothing stands out, and there's no clear focus on where people actually sit or interact. The light is hitting the room straight down, which flattens the walls, shelves, and furniture, and makes the space feel visually dull. And because all the light lives above head height, the room feels stiff and institutional once you sit down, instead of relaxed and human scaled. And even though it's bright enough to use, the lighting doesn't invite you to stay. So it supports visibility, but it doesn't support comfort or any kind of immersion. Now, again, I uploaded this image to the lighting tool, and here's what I got in return. The light is now coming from multiple places, with this table lamp, floor lamp, a couple lights dotted around the walls, and the ceiling fixture, so no single fixture is responsible for lighting the entire room. The seating area feels more inviting than the surrounding space, with some softer light in the background allowing the room to feel calmer and more layered overall. The light is no longer just coming straight down, because we've got side lighting on the walls and shelves that adds some depth to the surfaces at night. Most of the useful light now sits around eye level, which immediately makes the room feel more relaxed and scaled for humans. And the space now supports how it's meant to be used, because it feels warm, comfortable, and like a place you'd actually want to sit and stay for a while. Now let's look at a third example of this dining room. So just like in the last example, all the light is coming from a single ceiling fixture, so the room is lit from above with no secondary sources to soften or layer the space. Everything is lit at nearly the same brightness, which flattens the room and gives no visual priority to the dining table where people actually gather. The light is hitting the room straight down and straight on, which removes shadows, hides textures, and makes the space feel better during the day than it does at night. All of the light sits far above eye level when people are seated, so the room feels more like a pass-through or a break room than a place that's designed for sitting and lingering. And even though the room is definitely bright enough to use, the lighting feels neutral and temporary. It's not warm or social, and it doesn't encourage conversation or long meals. But after running it through the lighting tool, here's what we're left with. The lighting now comes from multiple sources. The soft pendant over the table, which is supported by the wall lamp and the floor lamp, so no single fixture is responsible for the entire room. The dining table is the brightest zone in here, while the walls and doorways fall a little bit darker, which creates some depth in visual hierarchy. The side lighting from the wall lights adds some dimension by grazing the walls instead of washing the room evenly from above. Most of the light now lives at human height, which makes the room feel calmer and more comfortable to sit in. And the space now finally feels warm, quiet, and inviting, which is perfect because it's a room designed for lingering conversations rather than a grab-and-go meal. Now, let's be honest, there's still more to be done in this room for sure, and the one easy thing that they could do here is put a piece of art on this wall, which is currently bare. But even just adding in these two new lighting sources of the wall sconce and the floor lamp in the corner, they give the room so much more dimension than it had before. So this is a great demonstration of how you can make even a very bare room look so much better just by adding in new sources of light. But let's look at a fourth example now, with this one being a much larger dining room. So as it is now, the room relies almost entirely on a single central ceiling pendant with no eye level or low lighting to create any kind of layered setup. And because the table, the walls, the corners, and the plants are lit pretty much evenly, the space lacks any sort of hierarchy and just feels flat. And that's because all the light is coming straight down, which flattens the wall textures, the plants, and all these beautiful wood surfaces instead of grazing them from the side. And with lighting placed only overhead, the room feels distant and a little institutional. So this dining room definitely feels better than the one we saw a second ago, and it is functional for dining, but it's not inviting enough for having long, relaxed conversations. And so I uploaded this image to the tool, and here's what we got in return. As you can see, the lighting is now properly layered, with a strong central pendant supported by multiple eye-level lamps, so no single lighting fixture is doing all the work. The table is clearly brighter than the perimeter of the room, while the corners and walls are falling off softly, which gives the room depth and a sense of visual hierarchy. The light is now coming from multiple directions, so overhead, from the side, and from lower down, which brings out the texture of the walls, the plants, and the wood floor instead of flattening them into a single plane. Most of the light sits at a seated or standing eye level, which pulls the room down to a human scale and away from that overhead only feeling. And the room finally feels warm, social, and actually nice to be in because it's bright enough to see people's faces clearly, but it's also soft enough to linger and stay a while. And now I know a lot of you are curious about lighting in the kitchen, so let's look at a kitchen. Here, just like as we saw in the other rooms, the kitchen is relying almost entirely on overhead lighting, which does make the space functional, but also makes it top heavy. And because everything is lit evenly from end to end, nothing has visual priority, which causes the room to feel flat and actually longer than it needs to. Now, most of the light is coming straight down, which washes the cabinet faces and misses the chance to highlight textures and this arched ceiling detail. And because nearly all the light here lives above head height, it gives the kitchen a clean but also slightly commercial feel that is far from cozy. And so the lighting in here definitely supports being able to see what you're cooking, but it doesn't invite people to gather or treat the kitchen as any form of a social space. So I uploaded it to the tool, and here's what we got in return. Instead of relying on a single overhead source, the lighting now comes from a series of layered sources. The recessed ceiling lights, the pendants over the island, the under cabinet lighting, and this low toe kick glow. The task areas like the counters and island are brighter, while the walkways, cabinet bases, and the ceiling arch stay a little bit softer, which gives the kitchen depth instead of a uniform brightness. The light is hitting from multiple different directions, so down from above, across the counters, and even softly from below, which brings out the cabinet faces, the backsplash texture, and that arched ceiling detail. And because the kitchen now has pendants around seated eye level, under cabinet lights at work height, and low lighting near the floor, the room feels scaled to how people actually use it. And so overall, the kitchen feels warm, inviting, and really social. Now it's a space that's meant for cooking, talking, and lingering, not just getting things done. So that's the scale framework. And if you start applying it in your own home, I guarantee you'll start getting comments from people on how nice your home feels in the evenings. And you'll also notice how good your place feels from the very first day. So if you want to try out the scale framework for yourself and instantly visualize your own space with lighting arrangements most people pay interior designers boatloads of money for, check out the link in the description. Of course, even the best lighting in the world can't mask mistakes that are blatantly obvious during the day. And unfortunately, a lot of people are making some pretty gnarly mistakes in their homes that make them look and feel so much worse than they should. And the worst part is, most people don't even know they're making these mistakes, so they end up living in an uglier, less cozy home than they could be for years. So if you want to avoid making the mistakes that could ruin all your hard work and waste thousands of dollars of your hard-earned money, check out this video up here. It's a good one.